are in the midst of life, people who are celebrating life. And I'm in all, and all are in me. And yet I am on my own. And I think when I'm on my own, I'm the artist. So there's an artist in each one of us. And therefore, today, which is the 30th of January, the day Mahatma Gandhi was killed, one of the tallest leaders of our regions and of the 20th century, was a victim to the politics of hate in which we are once again in the midst. He had accepted partition and had called for India and Pakistan to live as peaceful neighbors. Undoubtedly, Gandhi wanted Pakistan to protect its minorities and India to protect its minorities too. Not only that, after the carnage accompanying partition, Gandhi had the temerity to dream that one day Hindu Sikh refugees would return from India to their homes in Pakistan, and Muslim refugees, likewise from Pakistan to the places they had left behind in India. Today, our region has put Gandhi's understanding on its head, where the minority in most of our countries are almost living second-rate citizens, and the dissenters are criminalized. Before I conclude, I want to emphasize that dissent is a work of art, and as a medium of ethical intervention, art has been pivotal in conveying messages of dissent and giving a voice to the people. We at Sapan are pleased to bring together a stellar panel of artists from across the region to discuss the role of art and the artist in society and in resisting the forces of darkness, remembering Brecht. In the dark times, will there also be singing? Yes, there will also be singing about the dark times. I would now like to call Samir Gupta, one of our peacemongers, very active. He's a businessman, an IT businessman from Delhi, and Sarita Batola from Kathmandu. Sarita is into nonprofit management, interested in the informal economy and labor market. She's from Nepal. She's a women's rights activist, and she's also pursuing higher education, very much into South Asian politics. I invite them both to tell us a little about the Sapan story. Over to you, Samir and Sarita.
Thank you, Kavita. Hello, everyone. I'm Sarita Bertola. Today, Samir and I, founding member of Sapan, will share you the brief story of the Sapan. Sapan, South Asia Peace Action Network, is the tale of history, hope, and connection. When we remember the word Sapan, it should start with Bina Server. Bina Server thought about the Sapan. She dreamed about the Sapan, and it is carried by a number of founding members, volunteers, supporters, and our advisor. I'm not sure if we can highlight Bina in this at this point. If we can we highlight Bina? Bina is a journalist, artist, documentary filmmaker from Karachi, Lahore, work on peace, media, and gender issues. Bina is the editor of Aman Ki Asa, founding member of PIPF-PD, and she teaches in Boston. And she's a power bank for all the volunteer members, everyone who is active in Sapan. When we asked Bina, what made you work towards building Sapan? She said she's influenced by a couple of the people and they are Dr. Mubashir Hassan, sorry if I pronounced the name wrong, Asma Jangir, Dr. Bernard Lawn, and Dr. Muhammad Sarwar. Bina heard the concept of visa-free South Asia for the first time from Dr. Mubashir Hassan. Dr. Hassan, a hawk-turned-dove, is a co-founder of Pakistan-India People's Forum for Peace and Democracy. Dr. Hassan introduced Bina to Dr. Lawn. Dr. Lawn is a peace activist, environmental campaigner, and Nobel laureate. In the slide, Dr. Lawn is signing one of many petitions urging the government of India and Pakistan for the peace and the open dialogue. And the person that influenced Bina is Asma Jahangir. Asma Jahangir saying, peace activists and human rights activists have to keep pushing the envelope. No one is going to give it to them on the platter. Is one that influenced her. Along with that, as we all know, education and courage starts from home. Can we have these slides for Bina's father? Which brings her father, Dr. Muhammad Sarwar, who led the 1950s student movement in Pakistan with DSF, Democratic Student Federation. With all the inspiration and background work, Sapan was founded in March 2021 as a network of peacemongers. The network is designed to connect people around the South Asia intergenerationally and interregionally. And over to you, Samir. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Sarada. So as she mentioned, Sapan was founded in March 2021 as a network for peacemongers in South Asia to collaborate and for them to exchange ideas and resources. The very first webinar that Sapan organized was on the 25th of April 2021, and it was about the cross-border empathy and cooperation in the time of COVID. This was a time when COVID was raising its head in India, and people from all over South Asia came together, in sympathy and in cooperation. The next event was on the 30th of May 2021, and this was again a solidarity event, but it was an event in which we shared our grief and we shared our inspiration and we shared the strategies that each country was adopting to deal with the COVID pandemic at the time. The event in June was about peace and health and how we can come together and deal with the issue of health as a matter of human rights. The next event was about women and sports, the challenges and wins. When women's sports people came together and we shared what are the challenges that they face and the winners and the wins that we had. The next event was about the rights of the incarcerated in South Asia. In September, we did an event about 9/11 and the impact that it had on South Asia and South Asians. That was followed by an event about the climate crisis in South Asia in October 2021. In November, we did an event about gender violence in South Asia. It was titled Feminize to Humanize. And last month, we did another one about human rights and equality in South Asia. It was about growing up and growing together and sharing the lessons and the resources to deal with the human rights issues in South Asia. And here we are, January 2021, resisting together, art and artists in South Asia.
So much, Sarita and Samir. I'd now like to call upon the most inspirational couple that we have amidst us from the village in Alibag in Maharashtra to read the Sapan Charter. Lolly and Ramu are both senior citizens, yet very young at heart. Lolly is an educationist who used art and music to work with children in the slums of Delhi. She still sings beautifully. And the Admiral received the highest honor in the Navy, being the Chief of the Naval Staff. An anti-war and anti-nuclear activist who has been fearlessly opposing the dismantling of Indian democracy. Over to you, Lolly and Ramu.
Thank you so much, Kavita, and all of you in Sapan who have been working so hard. It's a great pleasure for us to be able to present the founding charter of Sapan today. And I just want to mention that, as Kavita had said earlier, today across the country, we have been remembering, commemorating the memory of Mahatma Gandhi, who was shot dead on the 30th of January in 1948. And as we went through the charter once again, we both said to each other, this is something that surely Bapu would have approved of totally, because I think these are the dreams that were dearest to his heart. So in that spirit, we are happy to present before you the founding charter of Sapan, South Asia Peace Action Network.
Sapan is a coalition of individuals and representatives of various organizations joining hands for a minimum common agenda, reclaiming South Asia.
And in doing so, we reiterate our commitment to take forward the principles and ideals of peace, of justice, democracy, and human rights, articulated by visionaries like Dr. Mubashir Hassan, Nikhil Chakravarti, Azma Jehangir, Nirmala Deshpande, Kuldeep Nayyar, Rajni Kothari, amongst so many others.
A visa-free South Asia, or Confederation of Nations with soft borders, a region in which each nation ensures quality education, justice, and freedom of expression and religion to its own citizens, as well as support and solidarity to those of the other nations. We aim to reclaim South Asia, to quote another old friend of mine, to our mentors and visionaries like late A. Rahman.
We therefore support the objectives of SAARC, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, to promote the welfare of the peoples of South Asia and to improve their quality of life,
to accelerate economic growth, social progress, and cultural development in the region, and to provide all individuals the opportunity to live in dignity and to realize their full potential,
to promote and strengthen collective self-reliance among the countries of South Asia,
to contribute to mutual trust, understanding, and appreciation of one another's problems,
and to promote active collaboration and mutual assistance in the economic, social, cultural, technical, and scientific fields,
to strengthen cooperation with other developing countries,
and to strengthen cooperation among themselves in international forums on matters of common interest,
and to cooperate with international and regional organizations with similar aims and purposes.
The South Asia Peace Action Network, therefore, calls on the government and the peoples of South Asian nations to work towards
instituting soft borders and visa-free South Asia, or visa on arrival, to allow freedom of trade and travel to each other's citizens,
to ensure human rights and dignity for all their citizens, including religious and ethnic minorities, women, children, and other oppressed communities,
cooperate in areas related to public health, culture, and legal reform, education and environment, climate change, water issues, disarmament, and demilitarization and denuclearization.
Thank you. Namaste.
Adab.
Salam.
Thank you so much, Lolly and Ramu. All our friends who are watching us on Facebook Live and who are in the room, please endorse the Sapan Charter. If you have not done it, you may do so at our website, www.southasiapeace.com. I'd now like to call upon our colleague, Sneha Jha from Bihar, but presently in London. Sneha is a research fellow at the Imperial College of London. Her primary research is in the field of artificial intelligence and the overlap of technology with policy, law, and ethics. She's a computer scientist, an activist, but very interested in socio-political issues in the global South, and therefore with us. Go ahead, Sneha.
Hello, everyone. As always, we would like to take a minute to focus on those whose vision continues to inspire us and whose ideas of peace and harmony we hope to take forward as an organization and as individuals as well. If one of you could confirm you can see my screen all right?
Yes.
All right. So these are the people that we honor as visionaries and friends, philosophers, guides. We'd also like to keep in our thoughts all those who we have lost in the past month, friends, collaborators, and people outside the organization who have shared our vision. Pioneering educationist and writer, Dr. Ismail Saad, prominent child and maternal rights activist, Sindhu Sapkal, prominent journalist and former editor of The Herald, Saqib Hanif, acclaimed bureaucrat and social activist, Tasneem Ahmad Siddiqui, eminent painter and professor, Mahmoud Ul-Haq, award-winning veteran journalist and editor, Kamal Khan, renowned social development activist and director of Orangi Pilot Project, Anwar Rashid, physicist, peace activist, and ex-president of People Union of Civil Liberties, Gujarat, Professor J.S. Bandukwala, noted Kannada poet, playwright, activist, and public intellectual, Professor Chandrasekhar Patil, Bengali writer and chronicler of post-partition East Pakistan, Mihir Singh Gupta, writer, educator, and environmental activist from Goa, Mario Aurora Kutu, founder member of People's Union for Civil Liberties, Rajasthan, and Indo-Pak peace activist Harold Singh, two-time Olympian and captain of gold medal winning hockey team at the Tokyo Olympics, Charanjit Singh, noted Malayalam language poet, orator, and progressive literary activist S. Rameshan, former coach and captain of national football team of Bangladesh, Shahiduddin Ahmad Salim, author, disability rights activist, and mountaineer who was part of the first successful Indian expedition to Mount Everest, HPS Ahluwalia, prominent Pashto language poet and teacher, Taskeen Manarwal, Olympian and the first Asian gold medalist of the 400-meter hurdles for Pakistan, Mirza Khan. We'll take a second to keep them in our thoughts and prayers, and I'll give this back to Gupta.
Thanks a lot, Sneha. Friends, you could go to our website and we have the memory wall, which has a large number of people who've been responsible for this people-to-people interaction over the years. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Fahad Ali, who will moderate our stellar panel. We are most grateful to Dr. Ali for stepping in at such a short notice after our original moderator, Dr. Shehra Mazhar, withdrew due to personal reasons. Dr. Ali heads the economics department at the Information Technology University in Lahore and is one of the founding members of the prestigious Habib University in Karachi. Aside from his professional identity as a political economist, you can see all those books, in the background of Dr. Fahad Ali. He has a very keen eye on arts and resistance culture, and he's a poetry connoisseur who has memorized the works of Noor Mim Rashid and many other poets. We hope he'll share some of this during his interventions. He's also an experienced and thoughtful moderator. Over to you, Fahad, and your stellar panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kavita ji, for these kind words. I'm really grateful to you and to Veena ji and to Lalita and Admiral Ramdas ji and other members of the Sapan community for giving me an opportunity to do my 2 bits worth of work to promote peace and harmony in South Asia. We have a stellar lineup with us today. We have Ms. Sangeeta Thapa from Kathmandu. We have Gupta Tinubara from Colombo, Lubna Mayamji from Dhaka, T.M. Krishna from Chennai, and Sarima Hashmi from Lahore. I'll introduce them individually as their turn to speak comes. But before we start it more formally and head over to our panelists, I would like to say a few words, if everybody permits me, particularly about sort of the moment that the South Asian region is currently passes through and how it in many ways links to its troubled past. So systemic and sporadic violence is not new to South Asia. Since colonial times, its people continue to live under different forms of violence unleashed by the military governments and or authoritarian regimes. At times, I think that the state and perhaps the majoritarian violence is the most enduring legacy of the colonial regime. Beginning from the horrific violence of the partition, South Asia continues to live through wars, internal strife, and in the past 3 decades, in the shadow of imperial violence that casts its dark shadow over the region. Yet the silver lining on this very dark cloud is that many from the region continue to band together across class, regional, caste, ethnic, and linguistic lines to resist all kinds and forms of violence. It would not be an overstatement if I were to claim that this resistance in many instances has been spearheaded by artists from the region and arguably by its poets. Whether it's colonialism or the partition and its consequences, or the events of 1971 and the War of Independence that led to the emergence of Bangladesh, or the 3 decades long civil war in Sri Lanka, or the fight led by the communists in Nepal, many brave artists chose the difficult path of siding with the oppressed. Perhaps the pain of violence in our collective inheritance is blunted by the poems of Tagore, Sahir Lodhianvi, Faiz Ahmad Faiz, Ali Sardar Jafri, and many others who eventually became part of the progressive writers' movement. Their songs and poems continue to motivate the millions in South Asian region and give them hope for a new dawn. It is, of course, not a coincidence that Faiz's poetry is sung at protests against CAA NRC in India, and the lines "Hum dekhenge," we shall see, carried the hope of not only the protesters in Delhi, but of all the oppressed people in the region. Similarly, when Pakistani artists and singers composed songs in the support of Indian farmers from the Punjab protesting the controversial Farmers' Bill, it reminded us yet again that the people of the region share a bond that goes beyond the hatred spewed by the state on its TV channels and school textbooks. Despite all the odds, it is the people of the region that continue to imagine a peaceful space and a shared life together. I must confess that I am guilty of the same mistake that is often leveled against the states of India and Pakistan at SARC. Their bickering continues to hold a regional organization hostage and keep it from achieving its potential for cooperation and building a peaceful South Asia. My examples of the bonds have not gone beyond the border that I share with India as a fellow Punjabi. This fault is entirely of my own making. I have not read wide enough to know more. I must. Yet I do want to claim without hesitancy that these bonds and ideas of shared life together are not limited to Indian and Pakistani Punjab. It is bigger and more powerful than any narrow-mindedness thrust upon us either by the states in the region or our own myopic views. South Asia at this moment in history finds itself at a difficult point, with authoritarian governments from Bangladesh to Pakistan and societies attempting to heal themselves from years of violence, Sri Lanka and Nepal. We need our artists more than ever before. We need our poets to give us hope for a better tomorrow. We need our playwrights and actors to tell us how to dream of a shared life together. We need our musicians and dancers to lift our souls from the entrapments of the tyranny of the state. And we need our painters to draw us the path that leads to a better tomorrow. It is precisely for this reason that we have gathered here today to talk about our shared life, past and present, through the eyes of the artists of the region. I would now like to give the floor to our first speaker, Ms. Sangeeta Thapa, who's joining us from Kathmandu. Sangeeta Thapa is the director of Siddhartha Art Gallery and founder chair of the Kathmandu Trinale, Nepal. Thapa has published 4 volumes of poetry and has written a book, In the Eye of a Storm, on the life and works of Nepali artist Manuj Babu Mishra. She has curated over 600 shows of Nepali and international artists and regularly initiates community art projects. I welcome you, Sangeeta Thapaji, to this
Namaste. Namaste.
I hand over the mic to you to share your ideas and your thoughts about how artists, how the kind of role that artists have played in the Nepali society and they can play in the larger in South Asian region to resist the forces of tyranny. Over to you.
Okay. Good evening to everybody. I would like to say that we come from a very ancient region, but we're still, we're still new. The hard borders were only drawn after the British left India, and that has really shaped so many things in the subcontinent. We're an old culture, but we're also new nations, and that comes with its own trials and tribulations. So I would like to talk about what's happening, what has been happening in Nepal with the arts, because the artists have really been, mounting their resistance from the time that the Rana regime took place in 1956. After the British quit India, there was no way that the Rana regime could continue. Its ramifications were felt in Nepal, and Chandraman Maske, who studied in the Calcutta Government College of Art, came back to Nepal in 1922 and created cartoons lampooning the Rana rulers of the time. And these posters were discovered. There were several writers and poets, writing poetry and literature in indigenous voices was repressed. And all of this came to a fore, and a sort of collective voice was growing. So by 1951, the people were able to overthrow the Rana regime, and King Tribhuvan was restored as the king. So amidst this euphoria and jubilation, Nepal opened itself up to the rest of the world following the overthrow after decades of struggle and sacrifice of the 104-year-old Rana oligarchy, and the emergence of a democracy emerged in Nepal based on the model of Westminster. But in 1955, when King Mahendra took over after the demise of his father, he started a coup in 1960 and imprisoned V.P. Koirala and established the partyless panchayat system. But at the same time, he understood that culture was very important for national identity. And at this time, we see that all the government institutions to promote the art were built, like the Nepal Association of Fine Arts, several other museums, all happened during this time. This period was marked by bucolic landscapes, return to village programs, and abstract experimentation. And the government commissioned artists to create works for government venues. In 1972, with the death of King Mahendra, King Birendra was crowned, and this period was marked by a period of sycophancy and resistance. In 1985, Nepal television was established. Global politics was able to enter the room of every citizen. I remember watching the fall of the Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu in 1989. The resistance by the public to a dictator made its mark, and the disenchantment with the autocratic rule of King Birendra created dissent on the streets. In 1990, there was a small revolution, and more power was conceded to the political powers, to the political parties. From 1996 to 2006, that's 10 years, we had a Maoist insurrection. There were 17,886 deaths, 8,191 disabled, and over 1,500 people were disappeared. This was also a period of trial and tribulation and great sorrow, because this was also the time in 2001 when we also had the Royal Massacre. But during this time, I would say, began the new age of artivism. And I would like to mention artists like Manoj Babu Misra, Durga Baral, Sashi Shah, Ragini Upadhyaya, Jyoti Dewari, Ashmina Ranjit, Susan Chitrakar, and a host of other artists came out on the streets with performances, installations, exhibitions, and they collaborated with writers, poets, with socially aware art practices, and tried to change and mount pressure on the government. In 2006, 2009, we had a new constitution. The king was overthrown. And this constitution called for 33% representation of women in parliament. It also gave more voice to the indigenous people. So from the art side, we decided that it was important to have an international art festival that explored the status of women through the work of artists and poets. So in 2012, we hosted the first Kathmandu International Art Festival. I remember Dr. Salima Hashmi also curated the Pakistani section with some incredible works from Pakistan. There were Begum Tayyiba Lipi and Mahbubur Rahman curated the section of Bangladeshi artists. And from India, we had Rekha Modi, and from Sri Lanka, there was Noli Pereira. Climate change, socially aware practices, resistance to government claiming public lands, all of this led to another Kathmandu International Art Festival, which focused on the issues of climate change. At the forefront were artists like Hitman Gurung, Chilasaraj Bandari, Achmina Ranjit, Susan Dangol, who came to the forefront and resisted the takeover of public lands. In 2015, Nepal had its great earthquakes, and that caused so much destruction. I know Pakistan also has these earthquakes, and India. So we are in a climatically vulnerable region. But I'm so proud of the artists during this time of great sorrow, where so much was destroyed. Artists went to far-flung villages in Sindhu Palchok, in Bhaktapur, and in several other regions, Dolakha, and started community art projects to alleviate the sorrows of the people. One of the greatest projects that I saw was conducted by Art Tree at Lobiasi in Bhaktapur, where the artists lived with the people who had been affected and created community art projects of hope. In 2017, we decided to curate the Kathmandu Triennale to create some hope in the city that had been destroyed. Kathmandu was really ravaged by the earthquake. And at that time, artists paid homage to the city by dedicating the whole Triennale to the city. It was called The City My Life, The City My Studio. The indigenous artist S.C. Suman raised his voice against the environmental impact of creating Nijgarh Airport, which would mean the destruction of 20 lakh sal trees. These things that are happening parallelly in Nepal. There's also resistance to the over-politicization of the medical sector by Art Tree, the public performance, and they call this performance a culture of silence, and resisted the culture of fatalism, which takes over so much in Nepal. Artists like Hitman Gurung and Sunil Sikdil, Mikh Limbu talk about the pain of migrant workers. And migrant workers, the issue of migrant workers is not only a Nepali problem. I meet workers from Bangladesh and Pakistan when I travel to the Middle East, from India. So, so many bodies come back in coffins. So this is a problem that artists have also been addressing with their work. In Photo Circle, when they curated their Photo Circle event, they talked about the pain of indigenous people who've been moved out of forests to create nature reserves. And last year, I'm just about.
Please.
Yeah, we exhibited the works by Lavkant Chaudhary, a Tharu artist, and Subhas Tamang, who researched the Mulki Ain created by Jangabahadur in 1854, where certain castes were deemed enslavable and expendable. Their works documented historic discrimination meted out to their communities and spoke of the injustices which were curated and marginalized them by the state. So we are getting ready for the Kathmandu Triennale, which was supposed to happen in 2020. It's been postponed to March 22, but we're keeping the Bikram Samvat date, which is 2078, decolonize time and move away from the Western canons of art. And we will be talking about indigenous issues and various other topics. That's it.
Thank you, Sangeeta ji, for this very informative talk. I hope that we can actually, at the end, we have enough time to come back for one more round of questions with our panelists. I would, to all our listeners and viewers, I would request that if you have any questions, please feel free to paste them either on our Facebook page or if you've joined in through Zoom, please paste them in the chat window. I would now like to introduce our next speaker, Gupta Tinubara, who is a Sri Lankan artist and activist. He is the founder director of Vibhavi Academy of Fine Arts, an artist-run art school and exhibition space in Colombo. He is among Sri Lanka's foremost contemporary artists. He's also a professor at the University of the Visual and Performing Arts, engaging with contemporary politics. His works offer a critique of war, human rights abuses, militarization, and authoritarianism. Gupta ji, I'm 43 years old and I've never had a chance to travel to most of South Asian countries except for Sri Lanka. Because we can get visas easily. So I did make use of it and traveled to Sri Lanka twice. And I think as somebody who's a grandson of people who moved from Indian Hoshiarpur, Indian Punjab to Pakistani Punjab, it's impossible for me to exist and travel in South Asia without thinking about the events of 1947. And both occasions when I went there, I couldn't help but feel in how many ways Sri Lanka actually represents what South Asia could have been without the events of partition. And in many ways, it also represents how the forces of nationalism and hatred have torn these societies at its seams in all over South Asia. So I don't know a lot about Sri Lankan history. I would like to know more, but I would like to, if you could, I would really request you to talk about sort of the healing process, if there is any going on in Sri Lanka after 3 decades of civil war. It's been one of the longest, if not the longest, in the world. Particularly in post-World War II world. How does the society come to heal itself? It's something that sort of, after going through such a long conflict. And what role can artists actually play in it, if any? The mic is yours, sir.
Okay, yes, thank you. Thank you very much. So I think, yeah, as you said, it's our country is more than 30 years of the war, and since 1983, and it was ended in 2009. But I think physically war ended, still the issues are remaining because the Tamil issue not addressed properly, and to sake of to solve the problem with the Indian government help, that they have a force 13th amendment done to our constitution, but it's still not in the full force. So, but there are a lot of disappearance happened during the war, no answers yet. So that is why there are a lot of issues. And the problem is here because it has a long history. And I think a lot of things started from in my opinion, in 1978, when the J.R. Jayawardena introduced the presidential rule in Sri Lanka. And with that, all the commodification and the all violence kind of system introduced to Sri Lankan soil. Because previously it was the Westminster style governance, and under the Sirimao Bandaranaike regime, so she extended extra 2 years. That was the reason to change the constitution to dictatorship to construct its own way by J.R. Jayawardene in 1978. With that change, he introduced the open economy to Sri Lanka. Actually, it's not just an open economy, it's a kind of, we can say it's like a naked economy. That means you can sell anything. You can sell country, you can sell your mother, you can sell whatever, your issues. And so that's happened with that 1978 change. Because to gain the economic revival, because 1970s were the very difficult time to pass in Sri Lanka. We had a lot of issues with sort of the rice is not enough and no chilies is not enough. So there were a lot of queues, and he promised that he's going to stop those queues and come to the flourish Sri Lanka and introduce this kind of mad dictatorial kind of presidential rule. I think that is the beginning of the art change of the art scene also, because previously it was like a kind of harmoniously doing artists did their own work and governments did their own work, and sometimes they praise each other. So it's a kind of without less interference. Might be that they are political alliances who are working with the government, they got the more privileges, but others are marginalized. Those things happen, it's kind of any governments or any patrons are doing that kind of things. But after 1978, it's a kind of sanction and prohibition of songs and films and theater started. We cannot say freedom of expression was limited. Limitation of that is started from 1978. That is the starting point of the resistance to the government against by the artists. But it was not a group activism, kind of individual, their own projects. Might be they cannot, they did it their own way. Kind of poetry written and song were sang and film were produced and theater was played. But unfortunately, the luckiest form of art was a visual art, because it was less sanctioned and less pressure politically. Some kind of, but I say it's like the politicians are not visiting the visual art galleries. That is why the political artist has more freedom. And that is why I enjoyed my freedom. Still, some people are asking how you live in Sri Lanka without harassment of the governments. What I'm saying in this you're in art, and what I'm saying is the politicians are not visiting. That is why I'm lucky. Otherwise, the politicians are going to the theater and films and songs. This is word-based art, so they can take those words and go into sanctions, public performance board and various, if you are using the anti-military kind of things, they can sanction it. They are criticizing the president, so then they can sanction it. So these kind of things has happened. But a lot of fears are there, but recently also, because of that introduction of the sanctions, and that is why some artists now, the poets are in the jail, so still not given reason why they are jail, because they are misuse the ICCPR Act and benefit of some kind of parties of the government friendly or Sangha or military. They can claim that this is the harming our society, and that's the only way that they can say. But that is why we have artists has to start a journey, Sri Lankan art scene. I think it is most of visible in visual art. It's changed, we can see after 1990s. So previously it was a kind of, for example, before 1978, the most critical art was in in print medium. That is the caricature, like Aubrey Collett, and the 1950s and end of 1958, 59, he exiled from Sri Lanka because of the political pressure. But those kind of, sanctions were there and pressures were there. But after 1978, either you have to praise the government or be silent or do your so-called artistic things, art for art's sake things. So if you are changing that kind of things, though you are inviting to the kind of political pressure. So, but unfortunately, you know, in a visual art scenes, we have long traditions of, you know, a kind of 1920s. It became a part of educational system, art introduced as a subject. So from that 1930s and kind of modernization and the modern ideals and looking for the modern ideas started in art scenes. And because new language was introduced, oil-based art or canvas-based art, European influence, and kind of new art forms. But previously it was a patronage by the temple, and temple paintings was the visual art scenes. But the only 1920s and 30s we can start the independent kind of artworks. So then it's 1943 is the modern art group and the 43 group, and there were a lot of art debates was going on within the art groups and the nationalistic art forms who supported the post 1947 issues, and the nationalism start to work, and who follow the kind of lines of Abanindranath Tagore style, might be the Shantiniketan style, and to do some kind of illustrative art, praising the Sri Lankan beauty and, you know, bodies and, you know, kind of poetic, lyrical language of art. But that was the oppositions to the 1943 modern art groups at kind of, it's a national kind of art movement. But the modern art was somehow prevailed, and it gained the more popularity, and a lot of people started to study and got a lot of opportunities after 1949 with the independent art school established in Sri Lanka. And so that gave the opportunity to practice the new language. And given kind of, I think the founder of that institute, J.D.A. Pereira, had the kind of not only promote the European art scene, at the same time he's talking about giving the national art forms also can practice in that school. So that is the kind of given the mainstream artist who came out of that institute. At that time it was called Haywood. That's the name of that building. That's Haywood artist. And so later it became the University of Visual and Performing Arts, now where I teach. I studied it there in the Institute of Aesthetic Studies, which was kind of there were tendency to people wants to change all the institutes to kind of university affiliated institute. So I think in a way it is kind of recognitions to the art as an important part, but unfortunately some kind of best practices and good tradition we lost because of the kind of degree awarding artists. You know, so especially when we became an independent art university in 2005. If you are looking at the history of produced artists, and more artists came before it became the independent university. So the less artists coming after it became university, because the university certificate became a kind of job opportunity. So that is the criticism we have. But luckily now we have not only the majority who are coming from that institute, and for example, I studied there from 1978. I passed out 1981. That period, yes, active artists were there, and musicians who are all theater people or whatever, they came out of that period post 1978 to up to might be the 1990s. So that period we can see a lot of the creative people came out. But now we have a new tendency who are coming out from the Sri Lanka, so who learn outside of Sri Lanka and come back to here and making art scenes. And the total change of kind of activism actually started in, I think, 1990s. That's the change. And otherwise, it was kind of the result of 1978 change. Most of the art producers and artists, they make art as a commodity rather than the kind of, some people make it as a living thing and kind of produce artworks to sell. And only the very few people, the artists, make art for art its own sake. Otherwise, then there are only might be the criticism or struggle was in the established new language of art rather than the changing of the society. So kind of there were we can read it differently how the society changed. It reflects in their art. But the more conscious politically criticism started from 1990s. I think it's a result of 1983 effects, how it's affects to the society, and 1988 and 89, the second insurgence of the Sinhalese youth. And when it repressed and more than 60,000 people were killed. And officially it was that.
If I would like to request you to, if you could conclude in the next couple of minutes, I would be grateful.
Yeah. So that is why the change. So that is why the kind of I think that more artists now are thinking about how to solve these issues, to interfere, changing the attitudes of the basic problems we have now, politics of hate, how to address that issue, and the nationalism everywhere. So then kind of religious extremism, that is the result. The new president became a power. He used all those, the politics of hate, nationalism, and religious extremism, and militarization. Those are the issues I think we have to deal with. That is why most of my art also, I'm addressing those issues, and kind of without changing that mindsets, we cannot go forward. That is why we will become a kind of dictatorial or kind of without freedom, the society highly militarized, highly extreme, and there will be a lot of pressures to the artists now, might be in future. That is why we have to have more conscious struggle against politics. Yeah.
Thank you, Chandra Gupta ji, for this very insightful brief talk on sort of not just the political history of Sri Lanka, but also how arts have played a role in sort of getting benefit from the state, but also trying to escape its grasp and trying to form an independent role for itself. I mean the artists, not and the institutions that they work in.
I can just say that the bowls are a very important, have been playing at this time in Bangladesh, a very important.
Do you want to put your video on for a second?
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that I don't know if Lubna can come in at some point or not, but the bowls have been at this moment playing, like before we had a lot of very strong anti-militant resistance kind of art form going on in the form of theater, poetry, songs, everything, painting, installation, sculpture. But now a lot of people are taking a lot of things from the bowl, which is really more esoteric, and it also taking a strong message across, which cuts across exactly what our Sri Lankan friend was talking about, against any kind of majoritarian religion, where religious-wise, ethnic-wise, whatever, class. So I think she ended on that. The bowls have taken a big role.
Yeah, she also had shared a video, and I think she's been bumped off again. I don't see her in the Zoom anymore. She had also shared a small, a 10-minute video, but we're not going to share the whole video. But I can share a little bit
I'll
of
just
it.
speak a little bit about it. It's a
Yeah, go ahead.
event that happened in 1971, where we lost one of our most, a very young and a very strong freedom fighter. He was killed, and it was based on that. And I think what she's trying to say in the dance is that people are talking about the hero, but not talking about the numbers. And someone asked how many numbers, and because I saw the video, and they said, we don't know, we never, so no one counted, you didn't count. But all these people who died, the 40 people who died in that one encounter, they were the masses, and they were the people who are the real heroes. So that's the dance that she did, and which she was talking about how she used what the government had asked her to do, but then brought her own message in about the people who really matter.
And we can share the link to the video in the chat and on the Facebook chat if somebody can do that. So I think that unfortunately, we lost Lubna Mariam.
Can we spotlight Mr. Krishna? So Mr. Krishna is a public intellectual. He is actually a preeminent vocalist in the rigorous Carnatic tradition of India's classical music. But being a public intellectual also, he regularly speaks and writes about issues affecting the human condition and about all matters cultural. His book, Reshaping Art, asks important questions about how art is made, performed, disseminated, and addresses crucial issues of caste, class, gender within society, while exploring the contours of democracy, culture, and learning. He's a recipient of the prestigious Raman Magsaysay Award and the Indira Gandhi Award for National Integration. We're very privileged to have Mr. T.M. Krishna, who's one of our very young artists in this country, who's really been causing a lot of movement in the present day when we're fighting fascism.
Thank you very much, Kavita ji, and thank you very much. Speaking after Lubna ji and all the great artists, they pretty much have covered a lot of the ideas that I think we all share in South Asia as far as art and artists and resistance and asking questions are about. You can hear me, right? I'm just checking. You can hear me, right? Okay. So I just want to move maybe the location a bit, and I think Lubna ji's slide hinted about it. We're constantly only talking about the state versus people. And I just want to shift that a bit here. Because resistance, when we only focus on this relationship as the context for artistic resistance, I think we also fall into a trap set by the nationalistic narrative for you to only ask that question. Because the nationalistic narrative actually picks holes on every ugliness that exists in society, uses that to further that narrative. And as long as we're only talking about that monstrosity that is obvious in front of our faces, I think we miss the other operations. So I just want to shift the focus a bit, because protest art also can be problematic. I know, I want to put that out also. I mean, Indian nationalism created a lot of great songs, a lot of great art. But that kind of art was also at times problematic. So it's not always true that protest art or protest questioning provides art that we would call democratic, that nurtures equality and nurtures empathy. That is not necessary. That protest, because of a consolidation against within a court, a common enemy, allows for a momentary feeling of asking the right questions. But it doesn't necessarily ask the right questions. If you look at the songs that came out during the Swadeshi movement in India, they are problematic. Their contexts are problematic. But at that point, the evil was the British. And it was convenient for everybody's share in that moment of protest. So I think there needs to be some more nuance in even fighting the state. And I think for that, we have to step back and look at all the other uglinesses that happen within society, whether it's caste, whether it's gender, whether it is ethnic othering. In India, for example, that whole term of the Northeast states, that term itself is an othering term. So I think artists' involvement in every one of these spheres of social divisions, these spheres of intrinsic habits of criminal activity in many cases, is very, very important. And that sometimes is much harder for an artist to do. Unfortunately, unlike some of my previous speakers, I don't feel so excited about the number of artists who participate in asking difficult questions. I think they are far less than there should be. I think there are far less artists asking difficult questions, political or social or cultural. There are very few. It's the same names that we keep seeing again and again. And if you look at who actually asks the difficult questions in India, or probably the other parts of the continent, I don't know much, I'm presuming, it's people who are on the margins, whether it is a minority in genders, minority in caste, minority in religious practice. It is they who have asked very difficult questions of social structures, of political structures, because to a large extent, it is their conditionality that has made it very difficult for them to remain silent. It's the people who are practicing the arts of privilege, the middle class and the upper class. They are the ones who have largely remained silent, aiding and abetting every form of violence in society. And that seems to continue today as we face probably one of the biggest challenges to our constitution and to our morality in India. And it has not changed. And I think the reason it's not changed is because social questions have not been asked by even these artists who protest against, say, the present regime. They have not asked questions about ourselves. I have not asked questions about myself. I have not asked questions through my art about my own location, my own gender, my own caste, my own blind spots. So this reflectiveness of asking difficult questions through music, dance, or poetry, or theater, or painting needs to be further cultivated within also the people who are used to not asking questions, or who are in a situation of convenience. So I think that is very important. There's another point here. We can't reduce art to just protest art. We can't constantly tag it with protest art. What happens to traditional art forms? They may not ask the questions that we want to ask in our modern language, in our modern sensibility, in our modern democratic vocabulary. What happens to that? How do they participate? I think this is also a very important point, because we tend to think of protest art in, if I may use within quotes, an activistic quality. We look for this activistic quality. What happens? What does somebody do if they're just doing a dance form and doing a traditional piece within quotes, whatever that means? Does that have a participation in the complex questions we are discussing today? If so, how? That also needs to be negotiated. And we as people of democracy need to find a language to have that conversation. We may find the situation of that art difficult. We may find the practices difficult. We may find it very complicated. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is that conversation we can have with those traditional art forms? Which those art forms where we may have great differences of opinion with the way it's practiced or the way it's situated. So I think there is sometimes wonderful things that happen if you just shift the space of an art form happening. If an art form that is of all privilege just moves from its location, it's the same art form. You don't do anything. You're not creating new poetry. You're not asking questions of the government. You're not asking anything. But say that just the situation of that performance is shifted. Does the conversation change? And sometimes it does. Just moving location. Because the participants then receive differently. It's the same story, but the story being told and received is different. So I think that is also something we should seriously think about, because otherwise we are also practicing a form of othering. In our want and very rightful want of furthering a very democratic conversation, there is a certain undemocratic nature when we don't have these complicated conversations with people of tradition. And I'm saying this because I think all South Asia shares in that idea of tradition. And sometimes we don't know what we are doing. We don't know how to have that conversation. We're very uncomfortable. And we're also uncomfortable because sometimes we also enjoy that. And we find conflict in ourselves. I mean, how do I reconcile that conflict? That a practice of a form which is ugly in social practice still gives me immense emotional pleasure. How do I reconcile that conflict? That is also a space we need to go into. I'll conclude by saying that I think a lot of these questions that we are asking of the state have to parallelly be asked. And I'm thinking of the long term and not the immediacy of the situation that we're all facing. Has to be asked of our various circles, of our various social structures in a constant dialogue. How do, for example, as a singer, how do I problematize my own practice? How do I problematize me singing? How do I find myself an ugly artist? How do I recognize that ugliness as I sing? That's, I think, the most difficult question to ask. And I think that's the question that I would like to keep asking, because from there, I think we can change content, we can change participants, we can change the context, and we can also create bridges that bring conversations between art forms, which intrinsically means people that occupy very different spaces in our society. And once we create those bridges, then we have a far more vibrant and, shall I say, a far more incisive conversation we can have with that monolithic structure that we call the state. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Krishnaji, for these very, very powerful words. And I think your point about artists asking the difficult questions of the state and not perhaps of the society is completely on point. And I think that's something that we all need to think about. And also sort of, thank you for actually moving our attention away from the state and to the society. We often forget that the state only emerged in the past 70 years or so. The independent states in South Asia only appeared, in 1947, and even the colonial state is far recent in the history of the South Asian region itself. So, but the society has, with many of its faults and flaws, have existed for a much longer time, and it's important to think about these. I also need to apologize for disappearing in the middle. My cat decided to pay a visit to the power plug that runs the Wi-Fi router. But that problem hopefully has been taken care of. I would now like to introduce our last speaker of our panel, Salima Hashmi, who is a renowned Pakistani artist and a former college professor and dean of Pakistan's National College of Arts. She's a recipient of the Pride of Performance Award in 1999. Hashmi is an accomplished painter and a widely published author, having written, among others, the critically lauded Unveiling the Visible Lives and Works of Women Artists of Pakistan. She's the curator of Faizghar in Lahore, a cultural space taking forward the legacy of her father, the acclaimed poet Faiz Ahmed Faiz. Welcome, Salima ji. Taking my cue from Krishna ji's talk, are the artists asking difficult questions of the society in Pakistan? Are they even challenging the state in any way? If you could talk about this among other things, I would be really, really grateful.
Yes, I'm very aware of the fact that we're short of time, so I'm kind of going to whiz through. And I apologize for the fact that I'm really going to focus mainly on visual arts, which is my area. But that doesn't mean that I'm not taking note of the work done in dance. I mean, Shima Kirwani is here, or of my late friend Madiha Gohar in theater, or in fact of people like Mushtaq Qazdar in film. But we're looking at some pictures, which I think is a little bit of a relief. And I hope Veena can share some of the images that I sent her earlier, or whoever is handling the the sharing of the screen, because what I'm going to see is very quickly taking you down things that have to do with the state, but also things that have to do with problems that my friend Krishna talked about, which have to do with us who are in this society and are the components who of the people, the artists who have to reflect or at least comment on what's going on. Lina, could we have the first image, which is a work by the artist Afshar Malik? Could we have the screen larger so we can have the image in the center? This is an early work. This was done by Afshar Malik, which is directly from literature because it takes on Faiza's poetry. The one on the left is Mere Hamdam Mere Dost. The second is from his poem Bol. And I think the images are self-explanatory. Don't need to talk about what they're doing. They're talking about repression and the fact that you are not allowed to speak. Could we have the next one? And but we're talking about then of women who during this period were like the other vulnerable parts of the populace. So that was women, it was the trade unions, and we're talking about Ziaul Haq's regime. It was the minorities, those that became targets for specially targeted during that regime. So you have somebody like Nazir Shataullah who's talking about the fact that the women become these non-persons who are silenced and they are looking through these windows, these apertures, which are beautifully decorated. They are the Mughal screens, but they just become then emblems. Could we have the next one, please? This is one of my own works, which is directly about violence, domestic violence. And I use my own face gagged. This was a very famous case in which this woman was violated in the most indescribable way by her husband, who was a cleric, who was a mullah. So I was really dumbfounded about how to deal with the way that her body was defiled. And looking at, the whole idea of the sacred and the profane, the man is leading the prayers. And yet there is this extreme profanity where it comes to the woman in his life. Surprisingly, the matter was brought up in parliament and nobody spoke except the then prime minister, who happened to be a woman, who then arranged for the woman's medical treatment abroad. Next. But then, humor is something that artists can bank upon, like writers, like poets, like theater people. This is a work again done during the Zia period by Durya Kazi, in which she's comparing the male and the female. And this kind of the fact that, okay, the female only needs 2.5 meters of cloth for her shalwar, but the male requires 11 yards for his shalwar. So the kind of, it's making fun of the difference, as it were, between male and female, which was the center stage, held center stage during those years, as special laws came in to target the women's status. Could we have the next one, please? And then the woman's body then becomes a space for contention. When the state takes over the woman's body's ownership, where it's decided that, okay, if a woman is raped, unless there are 4 male witnesses, she can be taken into jail for adultery. That is when the body comes back to the female artist for celebration and for defiance. This is the body which is, defined by the handprint of henna handprint, which is a traditional way of, decoration. But in this case, it covers the body, and then the artist takes it out of the studio and into the streets as a blatant throwing down of gauntlet. We have the next one, please. So there they were on the streets of Karachi, where Raisa took her students 5 o'clock in the morning before traffic started. And they made these figures on the walls in very busy thoroughfares. And the next one, please. Like this. The fact that they were defiled and taken away later doesn't matter, because she put one next to a barber's shop, an outdoor street barber's shop. And I asked him, because I'd gone to see these, And I said to him, you didn't remove the woman who's, was made it near your barber shop. And he said, no, actually my business has gone up since this image came next door to my shop. So, there were all kinds of reactions. And it's interesting to see how people react. The ordinary person on the street reacts to an artist's intervention in the public space. And the fact when she is actually, confronting what is her role, then there can be a range of responses. Next. And this is Imran Qureshi's work, which won the Sharjah Prize at the Sharjah Biennale. But to walk into the space that I did and have a terrible feeling of what we had recently been experiencing in Pakistan, the rise of extremism and terrorism, and the killing and the carnage in public spaces, especially in mosques of the minorities, like the Shias, like the Ahmadis. And this work happened immediately after that. And it was, go into the space and your heart stops until you walk in and go slower and look more carefully at what the artist promises, at what will happen after the carnage. Can you go into the next image? And then go further into the detail. Next. And then you see that life revives. There is hope at the end of it, where these blossoms emerge from the carnage. They emerge from the bloodshed. They emerge from the bloodletting. And you know that life is possible after all that you have experienced. So the artist is put in this position of really promising something. This is a work by Adila Suleiman, Karachi artist. We can have a look at that also. The next one, in which she is looking at the tremendous communal strife which has happened in Karachi over so many decades in different communities. And she's taking something out of tradition, in which she's looking at the legend of the fighters who continue fighting after they've lost their heads. And, they simply continue, the warriors continue. But they find themselves in this field of flowers, where even though blood has been shed, there is still something of beauty that remains with us. Next. And there you are. There is still something that is there out of this, headless warrior, this meaningless strife that is happening, that we deal with in our cities. We try and make sense of, and the artist tries to make sense of that also, and tries to make a promise to those that suffer, that those who experience this, that the artist is there with them for life to continue. Next. Farida Batul is an artist from Lahore, and this is a work called Nahi Sa Shahr Lahore Diyan, which is there's no place like Lahore, which those who live in Lahore know that there is no place like Lahore. But in the back, there is this terrible burning of the city, which took place as a result of the protests against the Prophet's images, that the cartoons that happened in another part of the world, and the city decides to burn itself in protest. And then there's this little girl who's skipping a rope. This is a lenticular print. So when you see this image, they actually move in front of it, the rope starts moving. So again, you have the woman, the artist, who is saying, against all of that, what we have done to ourselves in terms of destroying our own city, there is still this little girl who promises that, that there is a Lahore, which is lively, which will live in spite of what is there in the background. If you can look at the next one. Another work by Farida Batul, which is simple enough. I don't need to explain it. And the next. Very quickly, if we can have the next couple of slides. They are from Khadim Ali, who is a Hazara artist now living in Sydney. These are works that he did. And, we know the Hazara community has one of the most difficult histories of displacement and persecution across our region, across Afghanistan. So Ruby Chishti, who is a sculptor, her works are so endearing. The next image, if you can show of her work, which was, it's a reflection on her own life. And she was born and the family went into tears because another girl child was born. And the work is titled, My Birth Will Take Place 1,000 Times, no matter how you celebrate it. And these are these not quite human-sized and not quite doll-sized creatures that are made out of remnants of cloth plucked from here, there, and everywhere. And they are so moving. When I showed these in my gallery, I actually showed them outside with this photography. People came off the streets and they immediately responded to this work. There was something so moving, so endearing about these little creatures who were mourning and yet celebrating yet another girl child. Next. Clothesline, which was this artist, Aisha Jatoi, who did this intervention in one of the, we have all these planes and submarines all over Lahore. That's our public art, if you please. And so she took her clothes and she washed them nearby in a public tap, and then she put them out to dry on this, public piece of public art. Pretty soon a police wala came back and said, what are you doing? So she said, I'm drying my clothes. So he said, you can't dry your clothes over here. So she said, is there a law against it? And he was a bit nonplussed. She said, as soon as they're dry, I'll take them away. So it created a lot of merriment around, apart from the fact that it was videoed. So it's been shown 1,000 times all over the world. And that's a way that an artist actually uses humor, which is one of the strongest weapons, as we know, for all artists all over the world, whether they're poets or they're theater people or musicians or whatever. Next. Sabah Khan, she works with artisans to make sequins and makes these lovely images. This is an old one, but I don't think I need to say anymore, except it's so decorative and so lovely. Next. It's another one of her works, which was to do with the suicide bomber. Again, the moment of explosion, its loss, and that, there you are. Next, and we'll see that, I think now the last few. Imran Mudassar is an artist who lives in Lahore. These are these very quiet works, which don't say much, but they're talking about the weaponization that has happened over the last 2 decades, in which we can't get away from the fact that these weapons are in society and they target, they target life, which is right there in the center. Next. Okay, just very quickly, if you can run these through, because this is a street demonstration by young artists and students, which was against terrorism. It was, they were protesting on the streets against the Taliban. And this is, this is an anti-Taliban. This is, of course, and it says, Aman and Rawadari Hamari Pakistan. They're kind of rejecting what were the instruments of hate and instruments of violence. They were just out on the street. I thought it's nice to know when you have young people participating in something. I mean, young artists, you usually don't expect them to be out there, on the barricades, but they can be. And this, I'm ending with these last few images of, there's a group called, they work together, they are artists, they're anthropologists, they're just intellectuals and so on. It's the Awami Art Collective. And what they had done was that in this garden, they had on each of these little flags, there was a press clipping of a public killing, whether it was on ethnic grounds, whether it was on sectarian grounds, whether it was a terrorist attack. they covered 10 years of public news, which were printed onto these. And this was in a public garden in Lahore, in the Lawrence Gardens. And people the city people who use that space, they were walking up and they were looking up and they were reading this. And it was coming home to them, the number of lives that have been lost over the last 2 decades in public violence that has occurred in our cities and across our country. I think a very tangible evidence which people could look at and they could see for themselves. And this was not in a studio, this was just in a public park. And that was how, this is a top view of it. So, you know, this is artists taking their work to have with different ways of application. It is not about a product. It's not about, it's about, I think, what Krishna was talking about. It is about criticizing where we live, how we live, and what we can do. And if you can give me a minute, I'd like to end with Faiz. Not a piece of poetry, but a piece of prose in which he talks about the role of the artist. And, you know, when I find myself, as we've said earlier, compromised or beginning to compromise or trying to navigate, I go back to this. And he writes, my answer, when he was asked, what is the role of an artist? And he said, my answer is and would be, we are the offspring in the direct line of descent of the magicians and the sorcerers and the music makers of old. In times gone by, these ancients of ours could make the rain come down with their incantations. And with their songs, they could make the deserts bloom. And they not only implicitly believed that they had these powers, their community believed it too. This is because they found for their hopes and their fears of their people, for their dreams and longings, words and music that the people could not find for themselves. And by blending their collective will to a desired end, they could sometimes make the dream come true. So that is who we are. We are the inheritors of this magic and the power of the magic in big ways and small, depending on the intensity of our love our hearts possess and on the anguish we share with an anguished world, on the measure of our strength to defy what is evil and to uphold what is good. And thus, as a writer or artist, even though I run no state, I command no power, I'm entitled to feel that I'm my brother's keeper and my brother is the whole of mankind. And this is the relevance to me of peace, of freedom, of détente, and the elimination of the nuclear menace. But out of this vast brotherhood, the nearest to me and the dearest are the insulted and humiliated, the homeless and the disinherited, the poor, the hungry, and the sick at heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Srimaji. I think that was very, very moving and very powerful. I think I would like to conclude our session, and I would like to thank all of our panelists for giving, in a very short period of time, giving us a very enriching overview of what the artist and art can do in these troubling times. And I think, for me, one of the highlights of the session was that, the art that challenges cannot be meaningful if it is not introspective. And I think that's the point that Salima ji has just highlighted. That's the point that Krishna ji highlighted. And that's also the point that Lubna ji also highlighted. So I'm really grateful to all of our panelists. Thank you for joining us today and allowing us to understand our own society and our own lives from a different perspective. I would now like to call on Dr. Fawzia Diba to introduce the brief clip of a Pashto song she identified for this event. Dr. Diba is a physician from Quetta, Balochistan, who has volunteered with Human Rights Commission of Pakistan and has many honors and awards to her credit. She can communicate in more than 5 different languages. So over to you, Dr. Fawzia Diba.
Thank you, Fahad. Welcome to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in northwest of South Asia, known as the land of frontiers Gandhi, Abdul Ghaffar Khan, popular as Bacha Khan. A symbol of non-violent resistance, he spent almost half of his life in jail. Following his footsteps, his son Abdul Wali Khan pursued politics, whereas his other son, Abdul Ghani Khan's passion for poetry and philosophy caused him years of incarceration too. He also learned painting and sculpture at the Art Academy at Rabindranath Tagore's University in Shantiniketan. Today, we will witness an ensemble of music and recital of Ghani Khan's poetry in the voice of his devotee, Sardar Ali Tucker, a popular Pashtun singer. Tucker's work is presented here as an example of historic struggle of various Pashtun artists for human rights against the authoritarian clergy and mullah. No wonder why Ghani Khan's fans called him Liwanai Palsape in Pashto, meaning crazy thinker, which he admits here in this clip when talking to God.
I see Shima Kirmani in the audience also, and I know she has just come from a workshop or performance that she did in the Ibrahim Hedri area of Karachi. And I know she's been here in this program from the beginning. So if Shima ji, if you could see, Shima is one of Pakistan's foremost dancers and also feminist activist who does theater and has been performing for years and inspiring for years. So if you'd like to say a few words, sorry, Shima, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you want to just say a couple of words, just really quickly, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Bina, for giving me a few minutes. It has been wonderful to be part of this event, and I've really enjoyed everyone who's spoken. I think maybe what I could bring in at this point is how not only art works as asking questions, but also as a form of resistance, really, because that is the kind of art that we have been looking at. So when the program started, somebody quoted Brecht and said, will there be songs in this period of darkness? And so yes, we sing about the darkness, we dance about the darkness that we live in, we act about it, we do plays about it. And I think this is what art does. It not only sings about what is happening, but creates the hope of change, of overcoming this. And so that is the art of resistance, I think, which we in Pakistan are forced to do. And Krishna ji mentioned, what about the classical forms? What happens to them if you only are an activist? And I think for me, in living in Pakistan and having trained as a classical Bharatanatyam and Odissi dancer, just the fact that I used to perform classical Odissi and classical Bharatanatyam itself became an act of defiance, became an act of resistance to the kind of suppression of these arts that we saw starting from the time of General Ziaul Haq, when he actually banned women from dancing on stage, and where classical dance got totally banned and destroyed in this country. And all the dancers left Pakistan. And I think I was the only one who continued to say, because I felt that this is my right. This is my basic human right to perform. If those who don't want to see it don't have to come. So I think, and this kind of thinking has invaded every creation that I've done, whether it's a theater piece or it's a dance piece or it's a musical piece, that the lens that one has used to censor one's own work has been that it must be feminist, it must have a class angle, and it must have an angle of defiance, of resistance. I don't know how much time you have, so maybe just that kind. The fact that, you know, when the Dhamal was at Sevan, there was a bomb blast at Sevan, and everyone said there's going to be no more Dhamal, and I think everyone knows what Dhamal is. It's a form of traditional devotional ritual dancing. And I just went the next day and I said, well, who has the right to stop? So it's not only questioning the state, it's actually questioning and having an attitude towards an answer to the religious violent extremism that we see around us every day of our lives. And we have to resist that violence extremism. And I feel that the only way one can do it is through one's art. Thank you.
Thank you, Shimaji. And if I may add, I think Shimaji is one of the bravest activists and a feminist activist that we have seen in Pakistan. And I think if I were to recall, one of her many acts of bravery was one that when she performed Dhamal with her students at the Lal Shahbaz Qalandar shrine, a week after it was mercilessly bombed by the terrorists. I think that was an act of sheer bravery that sort of many of us over here may only hope to achieve. So hats off to you, Shimaji, for doing that.